Welcome, folks, and let me spin you a tale of redemption, courage, and the transformative power of a grizzled old soldier. Enjoy the story. James Winthrop was the epitome of a spoiled rich kid. Born into one of the wealthiest families in America, he had never worked a day in his life. His father, Robert Winthrop, was a self-made billionaire who had built his fortune through grit, determination, and shrewd business deals. But James had been handed everything on a silver platter since birth. Growing up in the lap of luxury, James developed an unshakable sense of entitlement. As a child, he would throw epic tantrums, screaming at the top of his lungs and hurling expensive toys across his palatial bedroom until he got his way. Nanny after nanny quit in frustration, unable to handle his outrageous behavior. "I don't get paid enough to deal with this little monster," one nanny huffed as she stormed out with her suitcases, never to return. But it wasn't entirely James's fault. His mother, Sarah, had tragically passed away from cancer when he was only 5 years old. Her grueling battle had ravaged both her body and mind, before finally claiming her life. Robert was devastated by the loss of his beloved wife. He threw himself into his work, building his company into an even bigger empire, but leaving little time for James. As James grew into a young man, his behavior only worsened. With an unlimited credit card and no supervision, he indulged his every hedonistic impulse. Booze-fueled parties, designer drug binges, trashed hotel rooms. It was all fair game for the Winthrop heir. Scandal followed him everywhere. The latest incident had been an epic meltdown at a high-end supermarket. Drunk and belligerent, James had verbally assaulted the staff and security guards trying to escort him out. He smashed bottles of expensive wine and wielded a jagged shard of glass as a weapon, while staggering through the aisles. It took a squad of police officers to finally subdue him. Robert had been forced to cut a hefty check to the supermarket owners for the damages. He also had to pay off the traumatized employees to avoid a messy lawsuit. But worst of all was the viral video of James's outburst that spread like wildfire online, bringing shame to the respected Winthrop name. Something had to change. Robert knew he couldn't let his son continue on this destructive path. But disowning his only child, his last link to his beloved Sarah, was unthinkable. Late one sleepless night, staring at a photo of Sarah on his mahogany desk, Robert made a decision. He picked up the phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in years. "Hello, John. It's Robert Winthrop. I need your help." John Ryder listened patiently as his old army buddy spilled his guts over the phone. The two men had served together in the 101st Airborne Division, jumping out of planes and raising hell across the globe. Though their lives had taken very different paths since then, the bonds of combat still held strong. After retiring as a lieutenant colonel, John had left the Air Force behind for a quiet life on his farm in rural Pennsylvania. With no family to keep him occupied, he spent his days tending to his crops and animals, enjoying the slow pace and solitude. Robert's desperate plea stirred something in the old soldier. He had never had kids of his own, but he had whipped countless unruly recruits into shape during his military days. Maybe he could do the same for James. "Send him to me," John said gruffly. "I'll make a man out of that boy or die trying." Robert breathed a sigh of relief. "Thank you, John. You have no idea what this means to me." The next morning, Robert summoned James to his sprawling Manhattan office. The young man sauntered in 2 hours late, reeking of booze and stale cigarettes, his designer suit rumpled. He slouched insolently in the leather chair across from his father's desk. "You wanted to see me, Dad?" James drawled. Robert took a deep breath, steeling himself. "Son, I've arranged for you to take a little trip. Call it a vacation of sorts." James perked up at that, a sly grin spreading across his face. "A vacation? Now you're talking. Where to? The French Riviera? Ibiza? Vegas?" Robert shook his head. "Not exactly. You're going to spend some time with an old friend of mine, John Ryder. He lives on a farm in Pennsylvania." James stared at his father in disbelief, then burst out laughing. "A farm? In Pennsylvania? You've got to be kidding me. What am I supposed to do there, milk cows and shovel manure?" "You'll do whatever John tells you to do," Robert said sternly, "and you'll do it without complaint. Consider it a chance to clear your head, get some fresh air, and exercise." Exercise? James scoffed. I have a personal trainer for that. I don't need to go to some backwoods farm. Robert's face darkened. This isn't a request, James. It's an order. You either go stay with John and follow his rules, or I'll cut you off completely. No more money, no more credit cards, no more trust fund. You'll be on your own. The color drained from James's face as the reality of his father's threat sank in. Struggling to maintain his bravado, he shrugged his shoulders. Fine, whatever. I'll go hang out with your farmer friend for a few days, but I'm not shoveling any manure. The sleek black town car rolled to a stop on the dirt driveway of John Ryder's farmhouse. James stepped out, squinting in the bright sunlight. He was hungover from his farewell bender in the city the night before, and in no mood for the fresh country air his father kept yammering on about. John emerged from the house, his posture ramrod straight despite his advancing age. He wore faded jeans, a flannel shirt, and a no-nonsense expression. James looked him up and down, unimpressed. "So you're the guy who's supposed to turn me into a real man, huh?" James sneered. "Good luck with that. We're not here to chit-chat," John barked. "From now on, you'll address me as Sir. Is that clear?" James rolled his eyes. "Yeah, sure, whatever you say, sir." His voice dripped with sarcasm. Quick as a flash, John was in his face, his steely blue eyes boring into James's bloodshot ones. "Let me make something clear, boy. You may be the big man back in New York City, but out here, I'm in charge. You'll do what I say, when I say it, no questions asked. And if you give me attitude, you'll regret it. Understand?" James swallowed hard, his throat suddenly dry. He managed a meek nod. "Yes, sir." "Good." John turned to Robert. "I'll take it from here." Robert gave his son one last pained look. "Be good, James. Listen to John. He's here to help you." With that, he climbed back into the car and sped off down the driveway. James stood awkwardly, his designer loafers sinking into the mud, as John eyed him up and down. "First things first. Hand over your phone and any other contraband." "My phone?" James protested. "But how will I stay in touch with—" "With who? Your drug dealer? Your drinking buddies?" John cut him off. "You won't need them here. Now hand it over." Grumbling, James fished his iPhone out of his pocket and slapped it into John's waiting palm. The old soldier promptly hurled it into the nearby pond with a satisfying splash. "What the hell?" James yelped. "That was a brand new phone." "You won't need it," John repeated calmly. "Now get inside and put on some proper work clothes. We've got a lot to do, and I don't intend to waste any time." As James slouched into the house, he could feel dread settling into the pit of his stomach. What had he gotten himself into? The first week on John's farm was the worst of James's life. The old soldier hadn't been kidding about putting him to work. Every morning, John would burst into James's room at the crack of dawn, banging a metal trash can lid like a gong. "Rise and shine, princess," he'd bellow. James would lurch awake with a pounding headache, his body aching from the previous day's labors. John had him mucking out stables, repairing fences, hauling hay bales, backbreaking work that left him filthy, exhausted, and miserable. The physical training was even worse. John would lead James on grueling cross-country runs, pushing him to keep up until he collapsed in a gasping, sweaty heap. Then it was an endless litany of push-ups, sit-ups, and pull-ups, far beyond anything his personal trainer had ever demanded. "Is that all you've got?" John would taunt as James struggled. "My grandma could do better than that, and she's been dead for 10 years. James wanted nothing more than to tell the sadistic old man to go to hell. But the memory of his father's threat kept him in line, and so he soldiered on, his soft city hands blistering and bleeding, his designer clothes caked in dirt and drenched in sweat. But it was the lack of his usual vices that really pushed James to the brink. Cut off from the booze, drugs, and endless stream of women, he felt like he was losing his mind. The sleepless nights were the worst, his skin crawling with need, desperate for a fix. One night, unable to take it anymore, James snuck out of the farmhouse and hot-wired John's ancient pickup truck. He peeled out of the driveway and floored it down the dark country roads, not even sure where he was going. He just needed to escape. He hadn't gotten far when he saw the flashing red and blue lights in the rearview mirror. Shit! James smacked the steering wheel in frustration as he pulled over. The police officer approached the truck, shining his flashlight in James's face. License and registration. I, I don't have it on me, James stammered. This isn't my truck. The cop's eyes narrowed. Step out of the vehicle, son. James complied, nearly falling on his face as he staggered out. The cop took one look at his bloodshot eyes and haggard appearance and reached for his handcuffs. Just then, another vehicle came screeching to a halt behind the police cruiser. John leapt out and stormed over, his face a thundercloud. Officer, I can explain, he said tersely. This young man is my responsibility. I apologize for the trouble. The cop looked skeptical, but after a tense conversation, he agreed to release James into John's custody with a warning. The ride back to the farm was silent, the air crackling with tension. As soon as they pulled into the driveway, John whirled on James, his voice low and furious. Pull a stunt like that again and I'll have you locked up myself. I made a promise to your daddy and I aim to keep it, come hell or high water. You're not leaving this farm until I say so. Got it? James nodded miserably. His shoulders slumped in defeat. Yes, sir. As the weeks dragged on, James slowly began to change. The grueling physical labor and training toughened his body, replacing his doughy physique with lean, hard muscle. John's discipline instilled a sense of structure and purpose that had always been lacking in his aimless, hedonistic life. But the biggest transformation was in James's attitude. Stripped of his wealth and status, forced to confront his own weakness and inadequacy, he started to see the world differently. The entitlement and arrogance that had always defined him began to melt away, replaced by a growing humility and determination. John watched the change with quiet satisfaction, his gruff exterior concealing a glimmer of pride. He began to share bits of hard-earned wisdom with James as they worked side by side in the fields or sat on the porch in the evening, sipping iced tea. You know why I push you so hard, boy? He asked one night. It's because I see potential in you. You've got a chance to be more than just another spoiled rich brat, but you've got to earn it. Ain't nothing in this life comes free. James nodded slowly, absorbing the words. For the first time in his life, he felt a flicker of something like purpose. Maybe there was more to him than just being Robert Winthrop's screw-up son. As the summer wore on, James found himself spending more and more time with Sarah, the pretty farmhand who helped out on John's property. With her sun-kissed skin, twinkling blue eyes, and easy laugh, she was unlike any girl he had ever met back in the city. At first, James tried to charm her with his usual playboy tactics, but Sarah saw right through his act, calling him out on his bull with a sharp wit that left him tongue-tied and blushing. Intrigued, James found himself actually trying to engage her in real conversation, listening intently as she talked about her dreams of going to college and seeing the world. Slowly but surely, a genuine bond began to form between them. They would steal moments together whenever they could, lingering by the water pump, brushing hands as they reached for tools, exchanging secret smiles across the dinner table. For the first time, James felt the stirrings of something real, something beyond the superficial flings he was used to. But trouble was brewing on the horizon. A group of local toughs had taken a disliking to the city slicker invading their turf. They'd cruise by the farm in their souped-up trucks, hurling insults and empty beer cans. John warned James to steer clear, but he was done backing down from bullies. Things came to a head one night at the local dive bar. James was shooting pool with Sarah when the gang leader shouldered up to him, reeking of cheap booze and cheaper cologne. "Why don't you run on back to your penthouse, pretty boy," he sneered, "and leave the girl for a real man?" James refused to take the bait, turning back to the pool table. But then the thug made the mistake of grabbing Sarah's arm, leering down at her. "Come on, honey, ditch this loser and I'll show you a real good time." Something snapped inside James. Before he knew what he was doing, he had whirled around and cracked his pool cue across the goon's face. The man reeled back, blood spurting from his shattered nose. All hell broke loose. The rest of the gang jumped James, fists and boots flying. But months of hard training had honed his reflexes and toughened his body. He fought like a man possessed, taking as good as he got, determined to protect Sarah. It was a brutal, bloody brawl. By the time John and the bartender managed to break it up, James was barely standing, his face a mess of cuts and rapidly swelling bruises. but he had sent a clear message. He wasn't going to let anyone push him or the people he cared about around anymore. John half-carried James out to his truck, Sarah hovering anxiously at their side. As they bumped down the dark country roads back to the farm, John glanced over at his battered young charge. "Proud of you, kid," he said gruffly. "You showed some real heart back there." Through his one good eye, James managed a weak grin. "Learned from the best, sir." The next morning, James limped into the kitchen, his face a patchwork of bandages and bruises. John looked up from his coffee, eyeing him appraisingly. "How you feeling, Rocky?" James eased himself into a chair with a wince. "Like I went 10 rounds with a meat grinder, but I'll live." John nodded, satisfied. "Good, because we need to talk about your future." James felt a flicker of apprehension. Was John about to tell him it was time to go back to New York? The thought filled him with a surprising sense of dread. Somewhere along the way, this farm, these people, had started to feel like home. But John's next words took him by surprise. "I've been thinking, kid. You've come a long way these past months, showed a lot of grit and determination. I think you've got what it takes to make something of yourself, something real." James leaned forward, his heart pounding. "What do you mean?" John fixed him with a level gaze. "I mean the military, son. I think you should enlist. The Army could use a man like you. It'll give you structure, purpose, a chance to serve something bigger than yourself. And with my recommendation, you could even go to officer candidate school, become a leader of men." James sat back, stunned. The military? Him? It was the last thing he would have ever considered before. But now the idea took root in his mind, filling him with a sense of excitement and possibility. A chance to forge his own path, step out of his father's shadow, make a real difference in the world. He thought of Sarah, of the future they could build together. With the discipline and skills he would learn in the Army, he could become a man worthy of her, someone who could give her the life she deserved. James met John's eyes, a slow grin spreading across his battered face. "I'm in, sir. Where do I sign up?" 2 months later, Robert Winthrop's sleek black town car once again rolled down the dirt driveway of John Ryder's farm. But the man who stepped out was not the same one who had dropped off a surly, spoiled boy that summer day. James strode forward to greet his father, his posture straight and proud in his crisp new Army dress uniform. The transformation was stunning. Gone was the petulant, entitled brat. In his place stood a confident, disciplined young soldier. Robert stared at his son, his eyes glistening with emotion. "James," he said hoarsely, You look like a man." James clasped his father's hand firmly. "I am a man, Dad. Thanks to John. He saved my life out here, gave me a purpose, a path forward. I'm joining the Army. I'm going to make something of myself, make you proud." Robert pulled his son into a fierce embrace, his voice choked with tears. "I'm already proud, son. So damn proud. Your mother would be too." John watched the reunion from the porch, a satisfied smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He had done his job, taken a lost, broken boy and forged him into a man. The kid had a long road ahead of him, but he had the tools now to make it. That night, the three men sat on the porch, sipping bourbon and swapping stories under the star-strewn Pennsylvania sky. James regaled them with his plans for the future. Basic training, officer candidate school, maybe even airborne school following in John's footsteps. "I'm going to make a difference," he vowed. "Be a leader, serve my country. And when I'm ready, I'm going to come back and marry Sarah, give her the life she deserves." Robert raised his glass in a toast. "To the future," he declared, "and to second chances." "Hooah!" John echoed, clinking his glass against the others. It was a moment none of them would ever forget. A moment of pride, of hope, of new beginnings. James Winthrop had entered that farm a spoiled, lost boy. He left it a man with a purpose, ready to take on the world, and he owed it all to the tough love and unshakable faith of one grizzled old soldier who had never given up on him. 1 year later, James and Sarah stood hand in hand at the altar, their eyes shining with love and joy. He cut a dashing figure in his dress uniform, the gold bars of a second lieutenant gleaming on his shoulders. She was radiant in a simple white gown, a crown of wildflowers in her hair. The small church was packed with friends and family from both the city and the country. Robert Winthrop sat in the front pew, his eyes misty with pride and remembrance. Beside him, John Ryder stood ramrod straight, his chest bedecked with gleaming medals, a rare smile softening his craggy face. As the happy couple exchanged their vows, James reflected on the incredible journey that had brought him to this moment. The spoiled, reckless boy he had once been seemed like a distant memory. In his place stood a man of courage, honor, and purpose, ready to take on whatever challenges life threw his way. He squeezed Sarah's hand, his heart swelling with love and gratitude. She had stood by him through it all, believed in him even when he hadn't believed in himself. With her by his side, he felt like he could conquer the world. As the priest pronounced them husband and wife, the church erupted in cheers. James pulled Sarah into his arms, kissing her deeply, pouring all his love and devotion into that one perfect moment. And as they walked out into the bright sunlight, ready to embark on their new life together, James knew that he was exactly where he was meant to be. The road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but with the love of his wife, the support of his family, and the values he had learned on that Pennsylvania farm, he was ready for anything. As they climbed into the waiting limo, decorated with ribbons and trailing tin cans, James took one last look back at the church. There, standing on the steps, were the two men who had made it all possible: his father, Robert, and his mentor, John. Robert met his son's gaze, his eyes shining with love and pride. He raised a hand in farewell, a gesture of blessing and release. James nodded back, a lump in his throat. He knew his father had struggled to let go of the dreams he had once had for his only son. But in the end, Robert had come to understand that James needed to forge his own path, find his own way to make a difference in the world. John, ever the stoic soldier, simply snapped off a crisp salute, but James could see the glimmer of emotion in the old warrior's eyes. In the short time they had known each other, John had become more than just a mentor. He had become a second father, a guiding light in the darkness. James returned the salute, his own eyes stinging with tears. As the limo pulled away, James wrapped an arm around Sarah's shoulders, pulling her close. He knew that the future held many unknowns: long deployments, lonely nights, the ever-present danger that came with serving one's country. But he also knew that with Sarah by his side, he could face anything. And as they drove off into the golden sunset, ready to begin their new life together, James felt a sense of deep peace wash over him. He had started this journey a lost and troubled soul, searching for meaning in all the wrong places. But through the love of his family, the guidance of a wise old soldier, and the unwavering faith of the woman he adored, he had found his true calling. James Winthrop was no longer just a name, no longer just the heir to a fortune. He was a soldier, a leader, a husband, a man who had been given a second chance, and who was determined to make the most of it. And as the limo disappeared into the distance, the strains of "Anchors Aweigh" drifting on the warm summer breeze, those who watched knew they were witnessing the start of something special, the birth of a new legacy, the dawn of a brighter tomorrow. For James and Sarah, for Robert and John, and for all those whose lives they would touch in the years to come, this was more than just a wedding day. It was a celebration of love, of family, of second chances. It was the first chapter in a story that was just beginning, a story of hope, courage, and the unshakable power of the human spirit.
All right, everyone's presentations are done. Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me and began to speak. There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. I'm leaving. After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. "Nick, is something wrong?" Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my second year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked, we could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. I will do my best. Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. Did you not hear what I said? I'm sorry. I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, I'm thirsty. Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children, with zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job. having joined the company wanting to do customer service. I don't care what they say, I plan to quit anytime, he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look. To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day. Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. So, you all get a chance. As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them. It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. All right, everyone's presentations are done. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me. There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. Still here? Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. I'm leaving. I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! What's wrong? Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself, had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? you're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, I'm very sorry. Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, get his boss here immediately. It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. What is that idiot doing? Alright, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next. Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you. I obediently followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was, as the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize. Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. What kind of training are you giving your subordinates? Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed. I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their in. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1: if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread, hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry. Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong. Mike, what have you done? Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. I didn't do anything wrong. You're still saying that? Look at him. Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract? Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go. Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him. There's no way he was pushed aside. Don't make things worse here. He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he? I don't remember that part. I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. But carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you've failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay? I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. Yes, I'm inviting my father. That's great. I might invite my parents too. I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hoped to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.